Joining us now, senior reporter at The Bulwark, Will Sommer, and senior writer at The Dispatch, David Drucker. Thank you both for taking the time. You have both been covering the MAGA movement for some time. Will, Charlie Kirk was just 31 years old, so young. Tell us more about who he was and how he became such an influential person in Republican circles.
Yeah, I mean, it's such a tragic situation. I mean, and it's also a remarkable career. He was really a monumental figure on the right, going in the course of just a decade from being a teen, very young Republican activist coming out of the Tea Party movement. Very familiar with people like Rush Limbaugh, previous right-wing media figures, and he created Turning Point USA, which was this conservative campus organization that ultimately was really able to grow, and eventually Charlie Kirk became close with the Trump family and was also very successful at both getting young activists and getting donors involved, and it became not just a sort of the campus organization of the past, but sort of a giant media affair as well. He had his own sort of media, talk radio, podcast, online video empire, and really sort of created the model for what we think of now as sort of the right-wing media influencer in the Trump era, and also someone who's just very politically powerful within the party. We know Donald Trump was in touch with him during the Epstein controversy, saying, you know, can you help me on this, reportedly. And so someone who is very significant in many ways in the Trump movement.
David, in today's, oversaturated media atmosphere, it's nearly impossible for a person to break through. But Kirk did. How was he able to do that and become such a well-known figure, even among those who don't share his political beliefs?
Well, he was very good at what he did, and he was really much more than a part of the MAGA movement that built up around Donald Trump. I mean, yesterday, as I watched the outpouring of condolences and grief from Republicans, what was very apparent was that Charlie Kirk was friends with and important to Republicans across the GOP spectrum. He wasn't just a favorite of what we think of as the MAGA movement. Republicans, whether we think of them as moderates or traditional conservatives or populist conservatives, it doesn't matter. He touched so many lives and had so many legitimate, close, heartfelt friendships with people in the Republican Party, in the conservative movement, and in the MAGA movement. And there are very few people, as I've covered politics over the years, that have that sort of breadth of connection and influence. I've covered a lot of politicians in both parties that are influential in their quarter of the party or in their sector of the grassroots movement that builds up around a party. Charlie Kirk was remarkable for not just the influence he had, but the friendships that he cultivated. And that's, I think, why you're seeing such an outpouring of grief from Republicans generally, but it really is such a tragedy for the country because he was practicing the art of politics. And whether or not you agreed with him, his wife now doesn't have a husband, his kids now do not have a father, for doing exactly what our Constitution and Bill of Rights was designed to facilitate, speaking your mind politically without the threat of violence.
And for years, younger voters were written off as becoming more and more progressive with each generation. But something changed, at least in this past cycle. Will, talk to us about how Kirk and his organization, Turning Point USA, got younger people engaged in the conservative political process.
Yeah, I mean, Charlie Kirk was a hero to a lot of young conservatives or even some young moderates who are on these colleges that are typically much more progressive spaces. And he was willing to go to these colleges and take people on and, rhetorically. And he said, prove me wrong. And so he would sort of hold these big events where people would come and debate him. And then, that then became sort of part of his legacy. I do think Charlie Kirk, to some extent made being conservative sort of seem cool to some young people. Typically, these are sort of, certainly conservative conferences are sort of more kind of staid affairs. He put on Turning Point USA conferences that were big spectacles. They would have big, significant speakers, and they would have, pyrotechnics and parties. And so I think in that way, he's sort of helped transform the GOP into the Trump era.
David, is there anyone else like Kirk in the conservative orbit, or was he just one of a kind?
He was one of a kind. I mean, I'm sure over time others will come along. But especially when you look back, not just over the past decade or so, of Charlie Kirk's rise and influence and all of that he accomplished. I mean, when you look back over the past 40, 50 years, somebody that came into the movement so young and was able to have such an impact on multiple fronts. I mean, it just was a very, very unique figure. And again, I just want to emphasize, really touched Republicans across the party spectrum, regardless of whether a Republican, however they classify themselves, and particularly since Donald Trump rose to head the party a decade ago. Republicans have had all sorts of internal squabbles about where they fit, but Charlie Kirk was respected and loved and touched Republicans in all different parts of that milieu, and that just made this not just an isolated event for some Republicans, but it made it for the movement and the party a very, very upsetting, tragic, and scary event because they all see themselves in some way, shape, or form in him.
David Drucker, Will Sommer, thank you for the discussion, helping us all understand a little bit more about who this person was and his mark on the world and in our politics of today.